Viewer discretion is advised. The following content contains graphic descriptions and may be disturbing to some audiences. Why are there not more people talking about the 1904 human zoo? In 1904, over 1,100 Filipinos were taken from their homeland and forcibly transported to the St. Louis World's Fair, where they were displayed in what can only be described as a human zoo. These individuals, primarily indigenous people, such as the Igorots, Visayans, and Moros, were hand-picked by the U.S. Bureau of Insular Affairs under the guise of an educational exhibit. However, the true purpose of their display was to justify U.S. colonial rule by portraying Filipinos as primitive, uncivilized, and incapable of self-governance. This atrocity was not an isolated act of exploitation. It was part of a broader system of racism and imperialism that sought to legitimize the colonization of the Philippines. The journey from the Philippines to the United States was long, grueling, and inhumane. These Filipinos were transported aboard overcrowded steamships, sailing across the Pacific Ocean to San Francisco before making the cross-country trip by train to St. Louis, Missouri. Imagine over 8,000 miles of uncomfortable travel. In 1904, the journey by steamship from the Philippines to San Francisco typically took around 30 to 40 days, depending on weather conditions and the specific route taken. The ships often made stops along the way, such as in Japan, Hawaii, or Guam, before reaching the U.S. West Coast. They were not fully informed about the true purpose of their journey. Some were even deceived into believing they were simply participating in an international cultural exhibit. The U.S. government issued special visas or travel permits, classifying the Filipinos as wards of the state rather than citizens with rights. This designation stripped them of legal protections and placed them under strict government supervision. Furthermore, the U.S. government spent $1.5 million solely on their transport, equivalent to over $53 million today, highlighting the vast resources dedicated to uprooting and exploiting them for public spectacle. They were classified as ethnographic specimens rather than official visitors. The living conditions aboard the steamships were horrific. The passengers were crammed into tight, unsanitary quarters with poor ventilation, inadequate food and water, and little to no medical care. Many suffered from malnutrition, infections, and exhaustion. These conditions were so severe that numerous Filipinos died during the voyage. Their bodies were often discarded without ceremony, and tragically, the brains of several deceased individuals were preserved and sent to the Smithsonian institution as part of a dehumanizing study intended to validate the belief in racial inferiority. These gruesome actions were meant to further cement the idea of Filipino inferiority in the minds of the American public and justify continued colonial exploitation. The dead were not given the dignity of a proper burial, but instead their bodies were dissected for scientific study, with their brains being preserved as grotesque trophies. Are you ready to take action? Let's make history together. Filipinos must lead the movement for historical justice. The 1904 exhibit was part of a broader system of colonial oppression that still affects Filipinos today. The racial stereotypes created at the fair shaped U.S. policies toward Filipinos for decades, restricting immigration, justifying discrimination, and reinforcing second-class status. Filipinos must reclaim their history and push for the truth to be recognized, taught, and memorialized. The legacy of colonial exploitation is not just history. It continues today. Some Filipino workers are still exploited worldwide, treated as cheap labor, and denied dignity. Global media and Western institutions still distort and appropriate Filipino culture, much like how the fair misrepresented Igorots. Human trafficking and labor exploitation disproportionately affect Filipinos, mirroring the way their ancestors were treated at the fair. If we allow this history to remain buried, we allow these injustices to continue. Upon arrival at the St. Louis World's Fair, the Filipinos were forced to live in recreated villages meant to mimic their supposed natural habitat. However, these villages were grossly inaccurate and designed to exaggerate stereotypes. They were forced to wear traditional attire daily, even in the cold, and perform staged activities for the entertainment of fairgoers. Igorot tribespeople, in particular, were exploited for their cultural practices, with organizers forcing them to perform ritualistic dances and eat dog meat in front of audiences to shock and amuse visitors. They were mocked, photographed without consent, and treated like animals in a cage, all while living in unsanitary and overcrowded conditions. Many fell seriously ill due to exposure, poor diet, and lack of medical care. And several even died before they could return home. Despite the suffering inflicted, the U.S. has never issued an apology, never formally acknowledged the pain it caused, and never taken responsibility for this atrocity. Even worse, this history has been buried, erased, and forgotten, leaving generations disconnected from a past that still shapes present realities. The dehumanization of Filipinos at the 1904 fair was not an isolated incident. It reinforced racist stereotypes, imperialist policies, and discrimination that lasted for decades. It justified the continued colonization of the Philippines until 1946 and contributed to discriminatory U.S. immigration policies that treated Filipinos as second-class citizens. Even today, Filipinos and other marginalized communities continue to face systemic oppression and cultural erasure. This must change. Filipinos and allies must take action. We must demand an official U.S. apology, reparative measures, and global recognition of this historical crime. But beyond that, we must also ensure that no people, Filipinos or otherwise, ever experience such dehumanization again. We cannot allow history to repeat itself, and we cannot allow injustices like this to be swept under the rug. If we do nothing, these types of exploitation and erasure will continue in new forms. To make a difference, we must mobilize in our communities and demand accountability from institutions and governments. Organizing protests and awareness campaigns outside U.S. embassies, historical institutions, and government offices will pressure authorities to take action. We must demand a congressional resolution in both the U.S. and the Philippines calling for an official apology, while also pushing for the inclusion of this history in museums, schools, and academic institutions. Filipino historians, educators, and activists must work together to ensure that this chapter is no longer ignored. In today's digital world, social media is a powerful tool that we can use to amplify our voices. We must create viral campaigns using hashtags like Justice for 1904, USA Apologized to Filipinos, and Never Again 904. By tagging US officials, lawmakers, and influencers, we can push this issue into the public consciousness. Engaging Filipino influencers, educators, and journalists will help spread awareness and encourage more people to join the movement. Schools and universities should hold discussions, seminars, and teach-ins about the 1904 fair. Filipino youth organizations can play a critical role by creating digital resources, documentaries, and podcasts that keep the conversation alive. We must also bridge the generational gap, ensuring that older Filipinos who may not know about this history can pass it down to younger Filipinos who have the power to fight for recognition. The demand for justice is not just about acknowledging the past. It is also about protecting Filipino identity and rights today. The Philippines continues to suffer from modern forms of exploitation, from the mistreatment of some overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, to the displacement of some indigenous communities due to corporate greed and government negligence. Advocating for stronger labor protections, indigenous rights, and historical justice is necessary to ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. The 1904 Human Zoo was not just an act of racism. It was a testament to how easily dehumanization can be normalized when people stay silent. We cannot allow this dark chapter in history to be forgotten. Never again should such exploitation be allowed to happen. Never again should history be erased. Never again should Filipinos be treated as inferior. If you believe in justice, if you believe in historical truth, and if you want to be part of the movement for change, subscribe now and stay informed. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on this fight for justice. Like this video to help spread awareness, and share this with your friends, family, and networks. Together, we will make sure the stories of those who suffered are heard, remembered, and honored. Never forget. Never stay silent. Never again.